your new book, The Another Self, and also not just your new book, but actually the crystallization of your last 2 or 3 decades of work with people, teaching and researching, and you being a biologist, also coming with this scientific approach, but at the same time, really trained in bodywork and trained in Qigong, as far as I know. So I think this is something really exciting to hear about these topics like somatic empathy, sensitivity, brain coupling, which I never heard before. Thanks to your topics again. And then just so many interesting topics you brought up. Meanwhile, we prepared for this interview. So I'm really glad you
It's a
accepted
pleasure to
this.
be here. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's great that other people are interested because, I'm obviously really interested. How do these things happen? Yeah, well, we'll talk about the sort of things that do happen. But, when I started Bodywork, there were lots of mysterious experiences happening that I couldn't get explained anywhere. And because I
And
am a
when was
Catholic,
this? Actually, if
pardon?
I can ask, like when was this? Like 20, 25 years ago?
Yeah,
Or
24 years ago, I sort of switched from being a research scientist to just having a part-time hobby of being a body worker, doing training in Shiatsu. And as soon as I started working on people, unusual experiences started happening where I was feeling emotions that weren't mine, having ideas that weren't mine, having physical sensations that I knew weren't mine. And the explanations that were around me were not um, not
accurate,
well,
at least.
they were they because I was a scientist, they seemed a bit flaky. That's, don't want to be insulting, but
And how did you know those things are not yours? I think that's the
well,
biggest question.
because this is yeah,
How
this
could
is
you distinguish?
because it happens so clear cut as to when I connected with my client, and when I disconnected from the client, I went back to being me, kind of thing. And I know that talking to other students, this was an experience that put quite a lot of people off. I
Mm.
mean, there were students that gave up the training
Oh,
because they felt it was too weird and that, they were being taken over or something like that. They didn't like it because it's kind of, it shifts your sense of self.
so that's
Uh,
the first reason, for example, why this is so important to spread
yeah.
these informations out there.
Yeah, because it creates a lot of fear. And also, because people don't believe you, you also start to doubt your own sensory perception.
Mm.
So if you tell people that you picked up someone's hip pain when you were working on them and they just roll their eyes, then you doubt your somatic empathy. Whereas, pain
Oh,
con-
yeah.
pain
Because
contagion is now, fully understood and recognized as a phenomenon that happens between all animals. Rats feel pain contagion from other rats to the point where they will, change their behavior to stop the other pain, the other rat being.
otherwise fine.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it
Which
happened.
leads us just exactly to the categories of somatic or just empathy and on different types of empathy.
Yeah. So when I was sort of starting to explore this, the first thing that hit me, the first problem, was that everyone calls it something different.
Hmm.
So the terminology
Confusion.
terminology was completely chaotic. You have to go back to 18th century German romantics when they called it Einfühlung, which is this merging with someone or something in order to understand it. And they wrote extensively about Einfühlung, but it's not something I'd ever come across, and certainly not part of our training.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this because I really would wanted to ask first that what is somatic empathy in your terminology?
Yeah. So
To just make it clear first for
yeah. So first of all, so what I was heading for was, um, what am I going to call this experience where you take on the emotions and physical sensations and even mental states of other people? Has it got a name? And when I was looking for this, I kept coming across this word empathy. And I didn't want to use the word empathy because for me, it had connotations of sympathy and holding hands, and
Oh, it was a little bit too soft for you.
it was a bit, it was,
You were too wild to do
it's like,
that.
no, I don't think it's empathy I'm feeling. Anyway, when I get a pain in the hip, I was thinking, yeah, I'm not sure that's my idea of empathy. But strictly speaking, empathy means understanding and sharing the feelings of others.
Mm.
So it's got two components. It's got understanding, it's got comprehension, but it's also got the sharing of how they are feeling. And that's the bit that
Yeah.
I was trying to discover. I was trying to explain this bit. So nowadays, psychologists and cognitive scientists divide empathy into two main types. So you've got the cognitive empathy, which is where, if I know that something bad's happened to you, I can say, oh, that's terrible. I can work out with my mental processes how that would be for you. I can use an analogy. If I were you, that would be terrible. But somatic empathy is, I don't need to set up an analogy. I simulate your experience and share it with you, and so we are in it together. And so,
Does it mean that you also feel a fragment of it, or full of what the other person feel, or is just, what do you mean by sharing? Sharing is just you
yes,
also
okay.
feel it, or it's like a big scale of
So hang on,
thing?
hang on, hang on.
Okay, sorry.
So you just wanted a definition. I'm just trying to get you a definition
Yeah,
before
okay, I
we get
see.
into
Sorry.
the mechanisms. So the definitions are that empathy's got these two components. It's got the thinking and the feeling. The thinking is the cognitive empathy, which is what most people think about. And the somatic empathy is the sharing of the experience, and it doesn't have to have any thoughts with it, and it's quite often unconscious.
I see.
Yeah. So that's when we get into the bit of our heart rates are coming into synchrony, our breathing comes into synchrony, and we're not aware of it, but there is somatic empathy going on. Yeah, I'm sharing your experience, you're sharing my experience. And yeah, so that's why I got to that term, is because I thought, aha, that's the word, that's the phrase that's explaining what I'm trying to,
That's
understand.
how you started to build up. So first of all,
Yeah,
have a good phrase for it, and then like frame
because
everything
yeah, you
accordingly.
can't write a book about something if you don't know what it's called, and everyone was calling it something different,
I see.
and they still are,
Mm.
so I've kind of tried to nail it down so that we can discuss it, really.
And yeah,
Yeah,
that's the major thing. Actually, the
yeah,
confusion could be cut out if you
yeah.
really agree on the terms.
Yes,
Brilliant.
and people still say, uh well, don't you mean somatic countertransference, or don't you mean projective identification? And it's like, does it matter? We all know what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
can we, just put the semantics over there for a bit? So what it is the sharing of embodied experience.
Wow.
And then you're going to say how, and the how bit is
Yeah,
why
it's like the big field.
well, it's why it took me 4 years to write the book, because explaining how it happens can be done, but it takes a whole book. I'll summarize it for you, but it's
Yeah, and,
um
and then yeah, and this video is just like a taster of the
yeah,
topics.
yeah.
We don't have that
So
much time to go in depth,
no.
so that's why you wrote a book.
So the types of things um that happen when we have somatic empathy is what's called emotional contagion. That's really ubiquitous. All animals, vertebrates, mammals, birds, humans experience emotional contagion.
Mhm.
So, if everyone around you is crying, or if everyone around you is laughing, you find your mood is inextricably pulled in one or other direction. And um, there are all sorts of good biological reasons why emotions are contagious. If you imagine you're in I don't know, it's being a dense jungle, and one member of your uh, group spots some danger, and they run full of anxiety towards you. it's really important to just get anxious and run. You don't want to go, well, what are you anxious about? Can you talk to me about it? It's like, so,
Actually, this happened to me when I was little.
yeah.
Yeah, as you
So,
just mentioned.
yeah, just catch the emotion and go with it, because we are, biologically, we're group animals and we respond to the group emotion really strongly. And this leads to what is sort of often called mass hysteria. It's very easy to get people
Oh
into
yeah.
a mass state of one emotion that's shared between you. But the other thing that's not so well known is pain contagion.
Oh, pain.
And pain contagion, as I've said, it happens in other species as well, and neuroscientists can measure it because they can measure the pain, the response to the pain areas in the brain.
Yeah.
So it's a real physical sensation that the person is getting just by watching someone else being pained. And we vary in this. So some people are extremely sensitive to pain contagion and they can't watch anyone being, even
Hurt. Yeah.
yeah, because it if they watch someone being touched, they feel it on their own skin. And if they watch someone being punched, then they feel the pain of the punch. And other people, of course, don't feel very much pain contagion at all. But in tests, if you show people like Joe Public, if you show the public a photograph of someone breaking their leg, a third of them will report discomfort in their own leg.
Yeah.
So that's a large chunk of people that are actually aware of pain contagion. Um,
And of course, I can see like a really big topic now could open up what it is that stops people from like the other 2/3 of, or the 1/3 just feeling the pain as the other, like the first.
yeah, well, that brings
We
us.
don't have to go there, but
No, we will go
we
there, but
will. Good.
not now. Yeah, so pain contagion, and what we've got going on here is not just the process, but we've got the level of awareness. So, people can have their pain centers firing off, but not actually be aware that they're feeling pain contagion. So just because they say they
Wow.
don't feel it doesn't mean it isn't happening.
Wow.
And
That's even more exciting to know, actually. Like,
and what interests me is that people who look after the chronically sick have been studied, because there's a big question is like, well, is it therefore unsafe to be a nurse or a carer?
yeah,
You're constantly looking after people in pain. And it doesn't look that good, actually, because when the research comes back, they find that, if you're looking after someone who's got pain in their right hip, after a while, the threshold for pain in your own right hip changes so that you're more sensitive to pain in your own right hip.
oof,
And so, yeah. And, there's got to be loads more researchers to say, well, how long do you have to be exposed? Can you do anything about it? And all like that. But it seems, when we get to talk about mechanisms, is that pain contagion is inevitable because it is how we perceive the world. We perceive the world by feeling it. So we can't perceive pain unless we feel it in some way.
I see.
Yeah. So it's just part of being alive.
And I can see how this is like an obstruction. People want to stay away from pain.
Yes.
The first thing they want to avoid, although they could understand. For example, now I'm thinking that does it work in distance? For example, if you have like a strong relative, a close relative, a strong connection to them, and maybe they're in a distance somewhere, could you also embody
Well,
the condition
I
or?
did a very nice experiment on a group of women, and they told half the women that their husband in another room had been stabbed in the hand with a needle, and they told the other half of the women that their husband had been stroked on the hand. And the women who thought that their husband had been hurt felt pain contagion.
Wow.
And so it doesn't even have to be real, and this is why.
It could be made up.
Yeah, and people who are very sensitive can't watch films because it doesn't matter that it isn't real. It's the information, once it's being perceived, it's embodied.
Oh, so now maybe the next question I would ask, that the self-confusion, so how we
Yeah.
perceive the world and we perceive our environment, like the people next to us, how much does it depend on, for example, this effect you mentioned? If I think something negative about someone or towards someone, can I get myself into a mess of like having pain in all sorts of parts of the body, or just
Well,
sympathize my own mind?
yeah, there's a
That's what
real
you say.
when we're looking at the mechanisms, the question that comes up all the time is, oh, so it's just imagination. And it's like, well, it's not just imagination. I mean, imagination is really powerful stuff,
Yeah, it
you
seems.
know. And the the difference between reality and imagination is really just one of degree. You know, it's not a distinction with a nice clear line. And what is happening with consciousness studies now is showing that our brain kind of has to make up most of what's going on, um, very well, but it's mainly a prediction of what's going on out there, and it simulates
Wow.
um, in our own body, um, a,
Scenarios,
a
maybe.
3D representation of what we are observing. Because if you
Wow.
think about it, your brain is a lump of wet jelly in a black box. There's no, it
Oh.
can't see anything, it can't feel anything.
Yeah, but people would think that the eyes are connected to the
They
brain,
do,
so,
they do, like a
but it's
camera.
not that you're saying that it's not really.
No, there's bone at the back of your eye. There's a tiny little nerve goes through.
Yeah, but the nerves, yeah, I see. Okay.
And it's completely encased in this black box, and it knows nothing. It can't feel anything, can't see anything, can't hear anything. And it
Fascinating
has
perspective.
to rely on the body to embody what is going on outside so that it can predict what people are going to do. So if I'm looking at you, I have to 3D simulate in my own body so that my brain can go, oh, that's what he's doing.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
We don't look at people and take shapes and then work out the shapes as to what the shapes mean. We feel. So I'm feeling your posture, I'm feeling your facial expression.
By feeling, you mean somatize?
Yes, like microscopically, my facial expression will be copying yours so that I can read what you're going to do next and all that sort of stuff.
Right now, I would like to fire Neg on questions, but we agreed that that's going to be like a third part
Separate,
of
a separate
video
thing.
after the Shiatsu part of video.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I would really fire it right now, but I will hold it back, maybe make a note of it. It's just amazing. The way you talk about the body, I think is pretty useful for people. And now, maybe,
I mean, I could, at this point, I could talk about a guy called Antonio Damasio.
yeah.
Um, Mind Made Self. Uh, I think that's his book. Um, you know, he's done all the groundwork on this. Is that you yeah, it used to be thought in cognitive science and in biology that, and most people still think this, that you know, you have these little simple animals and they evolve to get more and more complex, and you get humans, and then humans have intellectual thoughts and we have emotions, and that's the peak of, you know, evolutionary uh of consciousness. But what is absolutely evident now is that consciousness starts with sensing your environment. You've got to be able, as a simple organism, you've got to be able to sense what's going on inside the self compared to what's going on outside. Otherwise, you can't keep yourself alive.
Yeah.
And that is what evolves into complex consciousness. And that by the time you get to a human being, we've got all that really ancient stuff inside us still working, and this sort of more recently evolved intellectual stuff sitting on top.
Oh yeah.
And that the intellectual stuff, the clever stuff, is like a little broom cupboard in a mansion, and the mansion is functioning on a much simpler biological level, and that's what we're using, mainly this mansion, when we're doing shiatsu. You're kind of doing all the unconscious intuitive stuff, so you really need to understand how the non-conscious stuff works.
Which is I think a really dark area for
Oh,
us human, like regular human beings. Maybe that's why we are confused, because the picture you painted right now means to me that we have almost contradictory systems, because the evolution of the consciousness and then the biological needs, if they don't meet, for example, then we got confused of what's wrong with the world around us. Isn't it so?
yeah, I think the trouble is that by definition, we're not aware of
Yeah.
most of what our mind is doing.
Yep.
The biggest part of our mind is beyond our awareness, but it's still doing proper mind things. So it's still thinking, and it's still working things out, and it's still processing information about other people and what's going to happen. And then, by the time we're aware of something, of having a decision or a thought, it's really what's known as an afterthought. It's we're the last to know. And it's worth remembering that, so that you can, as a practitioner, if you're working intuitively, you can start to trust your intuition slightly more, because we've been kind of taught out of
Yeah.
that modern society, haven't we?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a mentor or somebody who really guides you in that direction, it's pretty easy to lose the ability to believe those messages.
Yeah, and I mean, I was, I'm as guilty as the next person of having been trained in science. When I came over to bodywork, I just used to roll my eyes a lot at all this sort of intuitive nonsense,
Yeah,
because I didn't understand that it's actually really quite profound and quite powerful.
indeed. And that what is it that makes somatic empathy stronger, and what is it that it makes the empathy weaker? Can
Okay,
you
so
guide us?
firstly, there's some neurodiversity. There's natural variation, like there is with all traits. So some people are naturally more reliant on feelings than thoughts, yeah, and other people are more reliant on sort of rational, analytical thoughts than they are experiential, intuitive feelings. So we kind of, we seem to have habitual preferences, which is great, because that's one of the reasons why humans are so successful, is that we've got this variety of ways of understanding the world. We're not all machines. Some of us are still
Yeah.
biological beings.
Although we tried hard.
Yeah. So there's that. There's your kind of predisposition, and then there's your kind of preferences and your habits. But there's also, I mean, there are sex differences which, are found in animal trials, and there are um, there are correlations with neurodiversity and certain mental health conditions as well, because we haven't got into it yet, but the way somatic empathy works, you've got to at some point have a distinction between self and other, and that process isn't always working very well. So in people who can't discern self from other very well, you can imagine the mental health problems that would arise. If you walk into a room and you are overwhelmed by everybody's emotions, and you don't know that they're not yours,
I see.
things
Well,
start to get weird very
that's
quickly.
disturbing.
Yeah. Or you have thoughts that are not yours, and so on. So this self other issue is really a hot topic in mental health research now.
And I can imagine this is pretty hard to judge right from wrong and useful from unuseful if you can't navigate what is yours and actually how to coordinate your ship in the ocean of
Exactly, and
information.
it's not been given due consideration that the somatic part, you know, that your physical response to other beings is going to influence your mental health. And so now, you know, it's a huge area of research. So yeah, there's a chapter in the book about autistic spectrum and how that influences a greater reliance quite often on somatic empathy rather than cognitive.
Yeah.
And at the other extreme, there are experiments showing that boys who are diagnosed as having psychopathic traits don't feel, well, they say they don't feel any somatic empathy. They don't have any physiological response, so they don't share anything with people, but they can work out cognitively.
Cognitively, yeah.
So they can be very clever and work out, oh, you must be feeling terrible, but they can't feel terrible with you. You know, so this is all fascinating because we have so much judgment in society about, oh, he has no empathy, you know, but I mean, it's not a choice. If you can't feel it, you can't feel it.
And also it's just a difference in mechanisms.
Yeah. So there's all those interesting, but the thing I think you were getting at is like, how do we control it? If, you know, how do we turn the dial up and turn the dial down? Yeah. And that seems to be down to attention. And attention is a really funny thing because it again, it's really hard to find a definition that isn't including the word attention. Attention is when you focus your attention on something. Yes. Okay. So anyway,
explained by itself.
What's interesting about attention is that it's sort of like and this is wrong, but it's a helpful image, is that it's sort of like shining a torch in a dark room. Yeah. So your mind is the whole room and the torch is just picking out little bits. But what happens when you shine your torch of attention onto someone or something, all your senses kind of, they all kind of focus as well, you know, and they're all turned up. The right ones are turned up and the other ones are turned down. So if I'm looking for red cars, let's say I'm interested in counting the number of red cars, my senses for detecting the color red will be turned up. My senses for searching for car shapes will be turned up, and all the other sensory stuff will be dampened down, you know, because the whole body goes into like red car mode.
I see.
And your search engine starts to predict where red cars will be so that your head turns towards red cars before you've even seen them. So this is what's amazing. It's called the pre-attentive phase. And so you end up feeling as if you've been guided towards what you were looking for, which is a feeling we get a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Which a lot of people would call today a law of attraction or creation or whatever.
So you focus on something and your unconscious will do all the work and even get your senses aimed at the right places, you know.
Amazing.
So when we're interested in a client and we want to understand a client, all the senses that are relevant are kind of turned up automatically. And all the ones that aren't relevant are kind of turned down. You know, we've got all these advantages going on that we're not aware of. And so if you, and then because perception is an embodied process, which we haven't talked about, but this is how it works, is that whatever you are trying to understand, so you might be looking at something, you might be hearing something, you might be touching something, whatever it is, you might be reading about something, your whole-minded body makes a little internal simulation of it. So if I'm reading a book about someone crying, I'll have tiny little micro adjustments as if I were crying. And if I read about someone punching someone, I'll have tiny little contractions in my fists. Do you know what I mean? So you're getting these tiny little micro movements all the time because it's part of how you understand the world.
So actually, you're saying again, this is the 3D modeling system,
Yes.
like a 3D projector in the body.
Yes, and that's how we perceive, and it's known as the body first model, because the body responds first, and that informs the brain, and then you
I
think
see.
about something.
And what you mean now with attention, that
Yeah.
some people who doesn't pay attention to their body, they don't really read these messages or informations, and then
Well, there's two things, because like if I'm talking and you're not listening to me, you're not paying attention, you won't feel any somatic empathy with me
mm,
because you're not paying attention to me. But if you want to understand me and you are looking at me and you're trying to understand me, so your body will be micro copying my expressions and my
yeah.
gestures. You know, you're trying to understand. So you're kind of, you know,
And also maybe the brain coupling effect also
yes.
plays
So
in here.
it that what's interesting about brain coupling is it's kind of a completely different set of researchers.
Or just on it.
They just
Just this one.
they've got a new toy, and yeah, they're playing with it, and so it's quite hard to join the dots, if you know what I mean, to join where brain coupling comes into the rest of it. I
Do,
think
do you write about this in your book? Do you have a
there's a
chapter?
chapter there's a
Okay,
chapter on the brain coupling stuff. Yeah.
that's
uh,
fascinating.
yeah,
And
and it
and yeah, I can refer back to some of the other interviews that you have done. You mentioned the brain coupling, and then that there's a sort of an alpha role in there. If, like, for example, two people, or like the therapist and patient conditions, is it true that the therapist should be a little bit of alpha there, to like an
of what
alpha role, so that the patient can copy, uh,
offer oh model,
yeah,
what do you
yeah,
mean?
yeah, a role, kind of a leader in that mechanism.
I see what you mean. Yes. So um
Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
yeah,
How does it work,
it's
in your opinion?
what's been happening in the research field is that um, they've looked at mothers and children, and they've looked at managers and no, they've looked at mothers and children, they've looked at teachers and students, and groups of musicians. And in those situations, the mother and child's brains, when they're communicating, they're trying to understand each other. So the child's trying to listen to the mother and the mother's trying to listen to the child. Their brains start to couple. Now, coupling is not synchronization. It's not one-to-one. It's a really complex interrelationship that is linked. So, for
Oh,
example, one person's brain sensory system could be linked to the other person's motor system, and as this changes, that one changes, but then
oof.
it's not changing like for like. And so they call it coupling rather than linkage, but it is, you know, anyway.
Yeah, I see somehow, or I feel the
Yeah,
difference.
and
And
it's
how
not,
do you, okay.
what they've deduced is that it's not just the listening apparatus and the speaking apparatus.
Mhm.
It's not linked in that sort of predictable kind of way that everyone was expecting. Anyway, so what happens when the mother and child have this brain coupling is that they then notice that the mother kind of instinctively trains the child to do what they want them to do. So
Is it like a little bit of leading?
it is like leading. So they can teach the child to pay attention to toys for longer,
Mm.
whereas the child would sort of flick in and out. The mother stays there, and the child comes back because, you know, they linked. And so they call it attentional training. And you know, children who've had attentional training from mothers seem to do better later on in attentional
Mm.
areas.
This sounds so important.
Yeah, and then they looked at teachers and students, and the students are coupling to the teacher in order to understand what the teacher's telling them. I mean, this is the common sense of it, is that the best way to understand complex information is for your brain to start to work in the same way. It's sort of like, if I want to understand French, I better start speaking French, you know. So so our brains are naturally set up to tune in, you know, to the same station as the person you're trying to understand. And when the brains are coupled, you start, what they say is that they're starting to work as a network. So you've now got network brains. So if you've got people in an office who are all working on the same project, their brains will be working in much more similar ways than people who are not working on the same project and who are not in the same office, you know. So they start to link up. And the idea, well, the theory is that brain coupling then means that your physiology starts to be quite similar over time, you know. And so you can get you know, kind of co-regulation thing going on between people.
This is so fascinating, this whole...
It is, but it's also worrying, you know, because we're very...
Yeah.
It means that we're very, very malleable. Yeah. We're very malleable, and yeah.
And then how would you...
So you were asking me about therapist and client, weren't you? Yeah.
How does it work there?
I don't know of any studies where they've hyperscanned therapists and clients, but what we do know, I suppose, is from our experience that we don't just feel emotions and physical pains. You know, I don't know about you, but you know, we definitely feel the way your thinking changes when you're working with certain people. Not everybody, but with some people, I get a really strong shift in the way my thinking is going, and I'm aware of, like, oh.
And right there, my question would be, do you also have a reaction to this change? I mean, for example, just suddenly starts to feel frustrated, or...
It depends.
Depends on your awareness or how cool you are, or...
I try not to have a personal reaction to it, because I've tried to train myself to be like a you know, just like a 3D simulator. So if I start to feel uncomfortable and my brain's starting to work in a different way, I try not panic. I just go, okay, this is how they're thinking at the moment. This is a weird, it's weird being them, you know.
But the key word here that you trained yourself, which is
yes, through reassurance. Yeah, because I think in the early days it is very unnerving. And
I can imagine you have been confused, for example, and
very confused,
and
and
you
also,
didn't know which one is whose material.
Yeah, and I looking back on it, made some mistakes of working with people who were very mentally disturbed when I shouldn't have done. And you know, it can take days to kind of recalibrate yourself afterwards.
Wow. But I think this is so important to mention, because the well-being of the therapist on this field, if you talk about therapists, it's really important not to affect the next client and the next client.
It is, but I think it's important not to be scared of our clients.
Yeah.
And I'd really like people not to be scared of people who have mental health problems. You know, I mean, this is part of the reason it's difficult for, you know, a lot of clients to get help, is that people are scared of them. And you know, so I'm the reason I've got into some difficulty in the past is that I will not run away, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, you've been too brave.
Exactly. And I think I need to be a little bit
bring them on.
principled. Yeah, how bad can it be? Oh, that bad. Yeah,
that bad. Yeah, but maybe that's what you call experience, and then from experience,
yes,
you can
but
help.
also, you see, it proves that I didn't really believe you could be that badly affected, because I just thought, well, you know, how bad can it be? Of course I won't suffer any terrible mental health problems.
Yes, somewhere you mentioned that that's when you experienced how difficult it is to have, for example, a psychopath or someone who is really troubled.
Yeah, a woman, she had a psychotic episode, and
Psychotic, yeah.
she wanted help during the psychotic episode. And I thought, well, how bad can it be? And it turns out it is horrific, absolutely horrific experience. And I shared it momentarily, and then felt that I'd recovered.
Mm.
But the next day, it all came up again for me, and I realized, got to give a bit of respect to this process.
And
Yeah.
how do you think this works? That you could balance yourself, but still the next day come back? Or what does it mean? It's like
Well,
fragment your system state somehow, like a
you got to remember this, that the mansion is massive, and the little bit of consciousness is the little broom cupboard. So my little broom cupboard's going, everything's fine.
but
In,
the
in the mansion, there's someone
it's
roaming
affected.
around.
Okay, I see. So basically, you say you haven't been aware of what's going on in the other parts of the system
You
because
you
you've
can't be
been
aware of, you can be aware of what's going on in your body, but you can't be aware of what's going on in this massive unconscious mental processing, because it is
yeah.
by definition unconscious.
Oh
So
yeah,
um so I kind of assumed that everything was fine because the conscious bit was fine. And yeah, learned a lesson of respect.
I
Uh,
see. I could
and
see why.
be careful. This is strong stuff. I underestimated um, the impact of somatic empathy.
Mhm. I see. Because you maybe you thought you are strong enough or you have dealt with certain level of problems and then
Yeah,
you've been introduced to a next level of
yeah,
problem. But maybe
and
that's the natural way of also you as a therapist to
yeah,
grow.
I think it's useful. It's very useful. I have the greatest respect now for people who suffer that kind of
Yeah.
problem. It is horrendous to experience it. So yeah.
Also, if I can link back to something you mentioned somewhere else, the medicines, the painkillers, and I
Oh,
can imagine that all sorts of medicines can affect these things. And then taking the fact that so many people take so much drug or medicine nowadays in the Western part of the world, how do you see this? And then a second question came up in me, like the technology, the smartphones, tablets, and whatever we use. Is this harder to navigate with somatic empathy in the world
yeah.
now,
I
or
mean, we'll start with the artificial intelligence bit, because
okay?
this really is the most concerning part of what's going on, I think, in society at the moment.
Mhm.
Because now that we've discovered that our brains naturally try to couple with other brains in order to understand them, so this.
I'm fearful what you're gonna say, like coupling with the computer, please.
And we're putting our kids in front of AI, which is far more intelligent than they are,
Yeah, the
and
parents.
is the dominant mind. And
It's,
they're trying to understand the game. They're trying to understand, what they're supposed to do. And their brain will be attempting to coupling with the AI. And I've got a chapter on video gaming, which is pretty horrific reading, actually. And I
in your
won't
book.
I won't go into it here because
Yeah,
it'll
yeah, yeah.
get everybody
Better
up.
read it. And on a personal level, I can respond to this because I've treated a 9, 10 year old kid once, and he was programming,
Oh,
and he told me his dreams.
wow.
And those dreams were scary to me, to be honest. But
Yeah,
I played, someone who can listen like almost endlessly because the
yeah,
kid couldn't really tell those dreams to anyone. They wouldn't listen.
yeah,
Um, and now, as you mentioned, this coupling thing, he seemed to be like in symbiosis of
yeah,
or with the computers that he really played a lot of times on. And then the world view is totally changed, and he couldn't really understand the family, the
Well,
parents.
how can you then couple with a real human?
Yeah.
I mean, because the apparatus has all changed.
And
And
that's why they brought him to me for Shiatsu, to help, because he had these outbursts of anger and couldn't handle situation. He couldn't handle why
no,
persons are not smart enough, as he's used to the computer to be smart enough, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
And it's
Well,
upsetting.
one of the examples I draw on in the book is in China, this famous case where a mother tried to take the game company to court, but she didn't have enough money. But there's a computer game where you can jump out of high story buildings, and you can jump 4 or 5 floors out of a building and land in order to shortcut and gain points, and this is the
Yeah.
game this boy was playing, and it was still on his computer, and he jumped out the window and died. And
Oof.
and it's like, obviously join the dots, uh and they're
It's
saying, oh,
affecting.
it's nothing to do with the computer game. Well, yeah, of course it is. Of course,
Yes.
it's to do with perception of what is reality, what you can do, what the real world is like. And yeah,
So maybe getting used to the no feedback system. So from the computer, there's not much feedback except the visual ones.
well, nowadays there's, I mean, the industry is very aware of somatic empathy and is trying to make more somatic empathy stronger, so that you get more engagement with the game. So now they're trying to make the chair vibrate.
I see. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
trying to make the wind blow across your face when you're running. So you're trying to get a 3-dimensional somatic experience, so that you now don't hold a little thing like that. You hold a gun, and you actually kill people with a gun-like shooting action.
Maybe having a sensory glove on, and
Yeah,
then,
and it will vibrate. Yeah.
oh Lord,
So they're fully aware of how embodied our perception is, because that's what gets you addicted to the game.
it sounds like a direct path toward Matrix.
Oh, it was a very depressing chapter to write, I tell you. Yeah.
Oh, oh Lord.
Let's
Okay.
get on to cheery things. Have we got any cheery things? Yeah, so therapists and clients.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk a little bit about, because you mentioned that you could pick up from the client, and then that's where my complex question comes in
Oh
play.
yeah.
That what's with the therapist? What is that the client can pick up? And then I just wrote down in my notes that maybe mention the brain coupling leading stuff, that you should be the leader in the situation. Does it
Yeah, it's
prevent?
funny, isn't it? Because I can remember when I first started doing, like, I qualified and I first started doing shiatsu, and I was under the illusion that it was all about me doing things. I'm
Yeah,
doing things to clients and I'm making them better.
yeah.
And I laugh now because how ridiculous that is. But I learnt, uh, I was very ill one day. I felt really ill and felt dreadful, and I couldn't do anything in shiatsu. I was just there going,
Mm. See,
and and all the clients said what a fantastic treatment it was. And I thought, okay, so if I get out of the way, they have a better time. And
don't disturb them too much.
so I needn't be there at all. Yeah, but what it taught me was that yeah, there's what's going on for them is often completely different from what we think's going
Of
on.
course, of course, always, always.
And that sort of idea of stepping back and getting out of the way and letting them do their thing. So what that means is that they are engaged in a therapeutic process. They've come to you in order to have positive change, and they're engaged in that process. And so they are paying attention to us only only through that interface, if you see what I mean.
I
So
see. Yeah, I
they're
see.
not
It's like a
interested.
directed channel.
Your client's not interested in how you are
Yeah,
they? Not
of
really.
course.
They're interested in themselves. Yeah,
Of course. And
that's the nature
that's
of it.
it.
But you're interested in them,
Mhm.
yeah, because you want to help. And so there is a direction. They are not going to pick up stuff from you because they're not paying attention to you. Do you
Ah,
see
I
what I mean?
see.
Yeah,
Oh, that's brilliant.
yeah.
But then it means also that you shouldn't take care of yourself. For example, what we heard from our teachers that smoking as a therapist is not really
Mm.
a good thing. But maybe now this explains that maybe they can get away with this because
Yeah, I mean,
what's your
I've
opinion
had
on
really
this?
good treatments from people who are, barely alive.
All right.
They don't have, I don't think yeah, it's
This is the time I should really throw out of the window my Nagon theories of therapists should get stronger and cleaner and like open
no,
their doors and
no,
stuff.
I do think it's great, but I think the reasons are probably not what you think they are. I think it's really important for therapists to be healthy and happy and fully functional because we have to put up with taking on quite a lot of simulating quite a lot of difficulties from other people. So we need to
I
be as
see.
healthy as possible. Do you see what I mean? But I don't think that your health is oozing into them.
Okay, actually, that's a really good
Yeah.
thing that you could like
Mm.
say it out loud, or you could make it clear that that's your point of view, so
Mm.
you can give a good treatment, still feeling bad and feeling sick,
Yeah.
maybe.
I mean, I think there are limits because I don't like working on people that are on heavy medication because it makes me feel ill.
Mm.
So if I was a therapist on heavy medication, I wouldn't feel good about working on people.
Treating others. Mm.
Yeah.
And wouldn't the thing you just mentioned, would it stop the mechanism that they listen to you? No, they don't listen to you and you listen to them. So wouldn't it also stop those effects or something just get
I
through?
don't know. I just feel I feel so unwell when I engage with certain medications
I
in
see.
people that I just wouldn't know um, whether that would impact the other way around if it were me that were.
I'm aware that this is like a really specific topic now, so we can
Yeah,
skip and then
yeah.
maybe put
But
it
like I think the thing you were getting to
forward.
just now was the research about painkillers.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of research looking at how very mild painkillers such as paracetamol reduces people's empathy and trying to work out why. And of course, the answer is that if you stop pain signals from your own body, you cannot feel somatic empathy. You cannot feel pain contagion of anyone else's.
Which is pretty logical, but we
Yeah,
wouldn't.
yeah. So joining the dots there, it's like your somatic empathy is switched off when you take painkillers because your somatic input is switched off. It's reduced, it's dampened down, it's not switched off completely, but it's dampened down. And so you become someone who can only empathize by analogy.
Mhm.
And not sharing the experiences with others. And they found that it isn't just it isn't just negative things that you can't share. You can't share other people's happiness either.
Which is almost the same importance
Yeah, totally. And
because
then
it's like distancing yourself from people, and so
yeah,
many people distancing themselves from others.
yeah.
Like, and
And
what?
that's just paracetamol, which is over the counter, and
Yeah,
a lot of people I know are on really strong tramadol.
psychotic drugs, for example,
Yeah,
or I think the same is with alcohol or anything that numbs your nervous system,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And of course, my personal theory is that that's why people take them. They don't take it necessarily for the painful knee, but it just takes the edge off social interaction because you don't have to feel everybody's stuff.
Oh, it's interesting because then you mention they numb themselves because it's too much, but then also it results in my point of view at the moment, like being in a bigger confusement. It's confused because you can't really send signals and receive signals.
Yeah, but I guess
It's like a mess.
depending on your social situation, you might not want to be sensing how your partner's feeling if they're not a very nice person.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a solution also, but also in a
Yeah, I mean,
because those people who don't wanna like sense the private partner, for example, they can also be numb to 10 other people which are not too close to them. So then the confusion is like spreading out, isn't it?
imagine if your job is, being on the front line paramedic, you've got to take on an awful lot of really difficult somatic
Yeah.
empathy all day and the normal stress of timetables and
Oof.
times and everything, so you can see how dampening down, just taking the edge off that would be attractive.
I can understand. And
Yeah.
probably this is the reason for the early death rate they
I
have.
don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Could be
But
like
yeah, it's
workload.
it's it's all relatively new findings. And so what I'm saying are like the beginnings of things, and all the research is continuing. And so it's gonna, in 5 years' time, everyone's gonna know a lot more about it. But and what interests me is that this research is heavily influenced by artificial intelligence, which is kind of ironic.
Ironic, yeah.
But AI is really good at
Computing.
interpreting complex systems information, and humans are complex systems, and when they interact, humans haven't been able to work out, even with all our fancy maths, as to what's going on, but AI can go, oh, I can see a coupling there between those two brain signals.
So it's just a question of accurate enough sensors, and they
And the
can actually
complexity,
find out
absolutely,
a lot
the
of
level
things.
of complexity, yeah.
Ooh.
And so if you give AI a really complex system, it'll find threads of connectivity that we've not been able to see before.
Or maybe just rare human beings could, I mean, a few of them could
Yeah,
find those threads, not the majority of, which
yeah.
means it's a big advantage to the AI, knowing the
Oh
human
dear.
brain. Thank
Anyway,
you
I
very
think
much,
I
Cindy.
think we're running out of time. Have you got
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, we do. Anything else that you would mention at the end? Anything that's major and we
um
didn't mention, the sensitivity part, or
I think we could probably talk again.
okay.
But it's we could have a deeper conversation if when people have read the book. She says,
and,
pushing the
and I
book.
have
but
questions.
but then there are questions, because obviously I had to read a load more than's actually in the book, because I had to kind of summarize
Of
certain things.
course. That's the
And
major work of yours, to summarize the loads of information and then put it into a digestible form. And as I've seen, I not yet have the book in my hands, but I've seen that the reviews are amazing. So it must
yeah,
be
much to my
really,
surprise
really
as well.
readable. Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you. It's been fun. Yeah, let's
And
talk
looking
again.
forward the other two parts, like
Yeah,
more connected to Neigong and
yeah,
what you would add there
yeah,
and how
yeah.
maybe Neigong is like beneficial for people, or what else you think is beneficial for people, not just Neigong, what else regarding this matter you just mentioned.
Yeah, we'll probably need to talk
Yeah,
about how to control somatic empathy so you don't get overwhelmed and stuff like that. Yeah.
thank you
All
very
right
much.
then. We'll talk to you again.
See you.
Bye.
Bye bye.